Daniela, and welcome to the programme. It's a busy one today. Almost a week since the missing Malaysian Airlines jet seemingly disappeared. We seem no closer to knowing what actually happened, but there's an increasing sense of frustration, particularly in China. We're going to be live speaking to people in Kuala Lumpur, in China and also in the US. Plus, reports coming out of the meeting between the US and Russia over Ukraine are not painting an optimistic picture, with the British Foreign Secretary saying it will be formidably difficult to make progress. But of course, just 2 days before Crimea votes in that referendum on joining Russia, neither side has the luxury of time. We'll be live in Crimea. And we're going to bring you a debate we had a little earlier on this week on identity with Scotland's Arab community. We're here live for the next hour, and as ever, here are all of the ways that you can get involved.
People are going to want to know. Let's just say something.
Well, welcome to the programme. Good to have your company. We will, of course, cross over to that press conference between Sergei Lavrov and John Kerry just as soon as it gets underway. We were expecting it to happen a couple of hours ago, but there's obviously a bit of a delay there. But we will, of course, break into that as soon as it begins. But first of all, let's concentrate on that story of that missing airliner that's gripped so many of the headlines for the last week. Let me introduce you to a couple of guests who are going to begin our conversation. Stephen Trimble is an America's managing editor of Flight Global and joins us from Washington, D.C. And Satish Cheney is a freelance reporter from Singapore at the Sama Hotel, which is near the airport in Kuala Lumpur. Satish, first of all, just bring us up to date with what people are talking about there. It just seems incomprehensible that we're, nearly a week on and there seems to be little real fact known about what's happened.
Well, that's right. Actually, it's day 7, actually, and we're still at square one. There's a lot of frustration going on because a lot of information that is coming in is coming from various sources. And within the Malaysian government, the agencies don't seem to be talking amongst themselves. In fact, right at the first few days after the plane went missing, there wasn't even a proper structure to have the flow of communications to the international media. And it's quite clear that, the Malaysian authorities have not handled anything like this before. The last time they had something similar was when the MILF, the Filipino rebels were in Sarawak and Sabah. That was the only time there was a slight international incident, but a lot of Malaysians are inexperienced at this.
So you think it's a fair criticism that they're sort of out of their depth, if you like? The Malaysian authorities really don't know how to conduct an investigation of this magnitude?
Well, I think when you're talking about the actual search and rescue operations, I do think that they are going all out, and there are 13 countries involved. And surely, I mean, with China's largest ever flotilla assembled to go and search for this plane, I think some of the criticism, has been a bit too harsh on the Malaysian search and rescue operations. And a lot of analysts have also said some of the equipment available in Southeast Asia may not be as high-tech as the ones in North America and Europe.
Now, I want to pull up a video and get your response to it, if I may. If you want to get involved and send us a video, you can WhatsApp us. All of the details are on our Facebook page, facebook.com/World Have Your Say. Alternatively, you can upload it at worldhaveyoursay.com. Kathleen got in touch with us from Lagos, and this is what she had to say.
It's unbelievable that in this day and age, we can actually tag our pets so that we can find them when they're lost. And a plane will disappear off the face of the earth with 239 people on board, and we cannot find that plane up till today. I think the families deserve better answers than just options. It's time for the officials and scientists and experts to come up with some plausible explanation of where that flight is.
Stephen, I could see you nodding as you listened to that video from Kathleen. Is it a fair point? If you can track a pet, how can we lose an airliner?
It's a fair question. It's a question we've been asking all week. Now, the technology is coming to do that. Continuously tracking airplanes will be possible in several years by satellite, but it is a fair frustration at this point that, and I think people are just surprised that something like a Boeing 777 can simply vanish and not be seen from again.
What about this point?
It is, you know.
Sorry to interrupt you. What about the point that the US say they have this new information, some evidence coming out? Although there have been so many false reports, it's difficult to know the fact from the speculation, but thoughts that maybe for 5 hours after it was last spotted, it was sending out these pings as they're known. Just explain a little bit about that to us.
Well, there is a system on board the plane that can communicate with Boeing, the manufacturer of the aircraft, directly for maintenance. It's connected to the maintenance computer on the aircraft, and it sends updates via satellite. Now, Malaysia Airlines was not subscribed to that system. You have to agree to pay Boeing to subscribe to that system. So that system wasn't transmitting any information, but there is still an antenna on board the aircraft that pings the satellites in standby mode to just say that they're ready to transmit if there was anything. Of course, but there's not. But that system is what the U.S. officials have reportedly been saying alerted them to this idea that the aircraft continued to fly several hours after it dropped off air traffic control radar. And there's a separate report about the Malaysian military radar, which picked it up and tracked it, or tracked an unidentified aircraft for several hours flying west.
Let's bring in Rob Mark. He's a commercial pilot and author of the aviation blog jetwine.com, joining us from Chicago. Welcome to World Have Your Say. I saw there, as Stephen was talking, that you were nodding. What would you like to add to that?
Well, yes, I mean, one thing I think we need to mention, in addition to the fact that we know that the pings to the system pretty much indicate that the airplane was operating. Of course, we just don't know where it is, and that is, as someone mentioned earlier, the biggest problem we're facing right now for the poor families, because they have no idea where their loved ones are, nor do we have any idea at all where this airplane is.
It is so frustrating, of course, for all of the family members. For the experts to kind of fathom the details is one thing, but as you stand there in Kuala Lumpur, Satish, it must be so deeply traumatic for the families to have no information at all.
Well, you know, certainly too, one thing, as I don't know the other gentleman's name, but he was right on the money. The technology, even though I can find out where my daughter is on a Friday night at 12 o'clock at night, we don't have the technology to know where every single airplane in the sky is at all times.
Satish, you were coming in.
Well, that's right. That's why industry experts have been asking for a complete rethinking of the black box technology. You know, if Wi-Fi was allowed on planes, you know, there could have been a higher chance of finding out what could have happened. But you were talking about the families earlier on. Quite a lot of the Malaysian families and about 20 or so families from Beijing, they are in a hotel probably about 20 minutes away from where I am right now. And you are right, they're absolutely devastated. The security there is really tight. It's very difficult to talk to them. Some of the reporters who have managed to speak to them tell me that it's been very, very tough for them. And I think each day when the press conference here is broadcast live on state media, you can't imagine how frustrated they must be.
Let's pull up this comment, which Jeff Wise wrote on Slate.com. The shock generated by the Boeing 777 mystery is largely a product of how we've come to take for granted the modern superabundance of information. We expect to know where everything is all of the time. And we are living in the Facebook, Twitter world where people are updating every movement every second. Some people have been questioning online why it is that any of the passengers weren't able to tweet, to pick up the phone, to give some kind of indication of what might be going on. Is that presumably, Rob, because there wouldn't be signals necessarily over the sea?
Well, it's not the only reason. I mean, there was, of course, we still don't know why the airplane ended up losing contact with the ground. I mean, there's certainly a couple of theories. One, that it was grabbed by, someone, managed to get into the cockpit and commandeered the airplane, or that something happened to the crew and the passengers on board that incapacitated them in such a way that they couldn't make a call. There was an error. There still is actually an airworthiness directive from Boeing that came out just last week that did warn 777 operators to check the airplanes for corrosion in the upper portion of the fuselage, because they were worried that if an airplane happened to have the corrosion, it could tear the skin in such a way that the cabin could rapidly decompress. And at 35,000 feet, the time, what we call the time of useful consciousness, how long you can keep your wits about you without oxygen before you pass out, is somewhere only between 30 and 40 seconds. So, we don't know that that's the issue, but it is certainly a possibility, and that might explain why no one got a call off.
Stephen?
Right. Well, I don't believe Malaysia Airlines had the connectivity installed on that aircraft that would have allowed passengers to send emails or text messages and that kind of thing to the ground. But the other issue is that if military radar was tracking it, making several turns and flying in controlled flight over their airspace, which we don't know yet, it's possible the pilot could have just, if the pilot was in control, he could have just turned off that system even if they did have it on. So that wouldn't be a tip-off either way, really, depending on the situation.
Of course, this isn't totally unprecedented. Back in 2009, there was an Air France flight that equally, quote, disappeared, and then it was found later, wreckage was found, but it took around 2 years to actually find the black box and what have you. In your experience, Rob and Stephen, do you think this is going to be a long period of time before any information is found on this flight?
Well, if you're asking me, I think it is, because it seems to me at this point, we only have two directions. Either the crew and the passengers were incapacitated and the airplane flew on alone until it ran out of fuel, or someone took the airplane somewhere for some other purpose that we have yet to understand. And of course, if it's the first, where the airplane simply ran out of fuel, we're going to have to start looking for it close to the edge of the ring that we know would have been the fuel exhaustion point, and perhaps they'll find something. Probably in the middle, if it is and someone took it on purpose. I seriously doubt we're going to find it.
Let's bring in Li Jia Chang, who is a writer and social commentator in Shandong in eastern China. Li Jia, thank you for joining us. I understand that you actually have a friend whose boyfriend was on the flight.
Partner, they're very much in love, yes, and Sarah, yes, and her partner is Philip Wood. I believe he's the only adult American on the flight.
Just give us a sense. We've already heard from Satish that the trauma that the families have to go through every day as they wait for this press conference, and the updates which seemingly don't really come because there's not that much information. Just give us a sense of what your friend is going through right now.
And my American friend, Sarah, talking about her, she's devastated, but she's very calm. And in Beijing's little hotel, where I'm normally based in Beijing, there's the relatives. There's a meeting hall designated for the relatives of the missing flight passengers. And they actually called her, asked her if she'd like to go. She said, no way, why would I go to it feels like a human zoo there. And I think, the pain and anguish has now been turned into anger and frustration. But my friend, she she more or less stays on her own, try to keep a normal life, and she still hasn't given up hope.
Well, you talk about that anger and frustration. Lots of reports of anger in China at the response from the Malaysian authorities, some criticism that they're not doing enough. Just give us a sense of what you're hearing there.
I think many of those relatives and friends are now, I think in some ways the anger, the pen has given way to anger. They are extremely angry at the Malaysian Airlines and as well as the Malaysia government, and they complained. And sometimes I think it's from the television I watched, and sometimes shouting at those people and demanding lots of questions. And they complained that the Malaysia Airlines hasn't responded very efficiently, very quickly, and the security was not tight enough. And they complained that the lot of misinformation, the information was not accurate. They demanded to know what happened, but they cannot trust any information. Everything's wrong. They complained all sorts of things, sometimes not very calmly, shouting, screaming. The journalists reacted also equally, Chinese journalists. You know, I understand you probably have to be a bit more aggressive to be a journalist reporting news, but some Chinese journalists have been particularly aggressive. And I've heard from, I have Chinese friends, journalist friends, and as well as Western friends, kind of camped outside at the Lido Hotel. And yesterday they fired many questions, and they said they lost contact at 1:30 a.m. Why? What have you been doing? And then they talking about the information regarding the flight is being turned around, and then they said not, and they want to know. And at one point yesterday morning, so every day now there are 3 meetings, so they gave them 3 briefings. And yesterday morning, at one of the briefings, one of the officials actually broken down. A few days ago, the angry relatives threw water bottles at some officials.
So a huge amount of frustration. Li Jia, thank you so much for joining us from Shandong. Thank you to our other guests as well. Well, we're going to take a quick break here on World Have Your Say, and then when we come back, we'll be talking about those talks in London between the US and Russia over the crisis in Ukraine. Do stay with us.
No, I am talking about it. Let me say something. I am talking about it. Let me say something.
Welcome back to World Have Your Say. Well, of course, there are those political talks going on in London between John Kerry and Sergei Lavrov as the US and Russian authorities try to come to some kind of compromise over the situation in Crimea. Of course, it's less than 48 hours before the people of Crimea go to the polls in a referendum to decide whether they want to join with Russia. Let me introduce you to a couple of guests who are here to speak with us about that. We're joined by Melinda Crane, who's a journalist at Deutsche Welle in Berlin. But first, let's cross over to Crimea and speak to Alia, who is a lecturer in Simferopol, and she is a Tatar, which is one of the minority groups in the region. Alia, welcome to World Have Your Say. First of all, tell me what the situation is like there. Does it feel tense ahead of this referendum? Just give me an idea of what it's like on the streets for you right now.
Well, even though the weather is very good now in Crimea, everyone is just in a big tense, you know. Lots of armed people are now walking down the streets, and that's very terrifying. Besides, well, the soldiers is not the most frightening. The most frightening for me is the crowds of people, very aggressive, and they are not Crimeans. That's they have the Russian accent, you know, and they usually are drunk and just going saying rude things to the people, especially for Crimean Tatars, and it's very scarifying. And the most scarifying for me is that now we are helpless, you know. It looks like a nightmare. People are showing lies on TV, but we are helpless to do anything.
So if that's the situation now, do you think things will ease after the referendum? Lots of commentators saying it's a foregone conclusion that there will be a vote to join Russia. Do you think it will become safer or more dangerous for you?
Well, now I understand that no one touches Crimean Tatars, especially or Ukrainians, because they must vote, and the government is still hope to gain our votes. But after the referendum, I think they will think that we are useless now for them, and I think that some violence can happen after.
Well, I want to pull up this video, which is from Yaroslav. He's originally from Crimea, but now lives in Lugansk in eastern Ukraine, and he sent us this video.
The question is what you can do to give the people opportunity to understand the Ukrainian arguments about the Crimea. Because my mom and my friends who still live in Yalta have a lot of propaganda from Russia, but they have no chance to answer because they don't know the position of Kiev. They don't know what Ukrainian government want to do.
Alia, do you want to respond to that?
Well, yes, the propaganda is really very huge, and almost everything that is shown on Ukrainian TV is now shown on Russian TV, like in vice versa, you know, in a false way, just giving misleading information. And so some people who are still want to stay the citizen of Ukraine are now how to say that they don't trust the government because they don't have the right information. They don't trust, and they are now ready to go to Russia, you know, and that's not very good.
Well, Alia, let me introduce you to Melinda Crane, who's a journalist at Deutsche Welle, joins us now from Berlin. Melinda, we've heard some very strong language from Angela Merkel over the last few days. She was quiet in the weeks running up to it. She's talked about Russia will not get away with annexing Crimea, talking about Germany saying that this referendum is irrelevant. Why do you think there's been a change in tone?
I think that there was hope at the beginning that through a strategy of engaging Russia, it might be possible to find some face-saving way for Vladimir Putin to back down. And I think as it's become increasingly clear that the referendum is going to go ahead and that it quite possibly might result in a formal Russian annexation afterward, which Angela Merkel said she believes well might be the case. She said that this week, that slowly Germany has come around to believing that this very cautious strategy, and you must remember Angela Merkel is known for her caution anyway, for example, in the sense of the EU crisis. She has been a very, very cautious leader, that slowly she has moved away from that stance. She did give a very unusually emotional speech here this week, saying that it would be a catastrophe if an annexation were to go ahead, and saying that it would impose massive costs on Russia. That's unusually strong language from Angela Merkel.
Well, do stay with us, both of you, Melinda Crane and Alia, joining us from Simferopol. We'll also, after the news, be crossing over to Washington, D.C. to get a view from there. If you want to add your thoughts, you can head to Facebook, facebook.com/WorldHowYouSay. Tweet us using the hashtag WHYS, and we'll be back speaking to you in the next few minutes.
Let me say something.
Are our focus. It is, of course, less than 48 hours before a referendum in Crimea. The German Chancellor Angela Merkel says Russia will not get away with annexing the region. The stakes are high, but time is running out. Welcome back to World Have Your Say.
Talking about it.
I experienced.
It's just what? This is chaos. People are going to want to know. Let me say something.
Good to have your company here on World Have Your Say. We understand that that press conference between Sergei Lavrov and John Kerry should take place in around 10 minutes' time. We will, of course, bring that to you here on BBC World News. But we're going to continue our conversation for now with Alia, who is a Crimean Tatar, which is a minority in Crimea. She is a lecturer in Simferopol. We're also joined by Melinda Crane, a journalist at Deutsche Welle in Berlin. But first of all, let's speak to Hayes Brown, who's a reporter at TP Security in Washington. Washington. Hayes, welcome to the programme. I know that you were listening to the conversation just before the break, and it was interesting what we were hearing from Melinda about the ratcheting up of the language by Angela Merkel over the last week or so. What have you made of that?
I think it's a sign that the diplomacy route is working in terms of Russia. I think that, the United States has been the leader in getting together the rest of the G7 countries, includes Germany, to have very strong statements on the fact that this referendum in Crimea is illegal in their words and should not count. They're also pushing a United Nations Security Council resolution to that same effect. So the United States has really been pushing the idea that Russia is the only one who will be recognizing this referendum in Crimea as legitimate.
But is it a case that the US is far enough away, it's strong enough that it can stand up to Russia, but it will actually be Europe that will pay the cost, if you like, if it decides to take Russia on head on? Is that fair, Melinda?
Well, the fact is, Europe does a great deal more business with Russia than does the US. There is a huge trade between Europe and Russia, and between Germany and Russia. Germany accounts for a third of all European exports to Russia. That's about 40 billion euros a year for Germany. So there's significant pain that Germany could feel here if, for instance, very strong sanctions were to be imposed, if there were to be a gas embargo. Germany is the biggest importer of Russian gas. But all that notwithstanding, the fact is that Russia is far more dependent on that trade than Europe is. Trade with Europe accounts for about 16% of all of Russia's economy, whereas it accounts for just about 1% of the European economy, meaning people say they're prepared here in Germany to bear some pain, but they're pretty convinced, and Angela Merkel has said as much, that the pain will be much worse on the Russian side if we do go to measures like a kind of an embargo of oil and gas or possibly trade sanctions.
Yet, Hayes, that doesn't seem to bother the Russians right now. The language coming out of these discussions in London, they seem to be very, very far apart.
They do, but the fact that they're having these talks at all is a positive sign. I think that what Kerry is saying right now to Russia is that we haven't really brought to bear all that we can do in terms of Ukraine. And if they continue to push us, we will pull the lever on the very heavy financial sanctions, sort of like what we've seen in terms of Iran, the blocking of Russian companies from the U.S. financial markets, which would be a huge blow to the Russian economy and has Russian businesses really worried at this point.
OK, let's get a response from Simferopol. What would you like to see the international community do? You're the person who's on the ground being affected by what's happening in Crimea.
Well, yes, indeed. And now my people, the Ukrainians also, we feel like betrayed, It turns that European Council or any other European organizations just like an NGO having no influence, It's really, I know that the sanctions are very powerful weapon, but do you think the head of the country will suffer more?
US Embassy in London, where Sergei Lavrov has just walked up to begin the press conference.
We also expressed deep concern about the fact that the necessary measures to install security and law and order have not been taken. No effective measures have been taken to stop the radicals and their illegal activities who are stepping up their provocations, including armed provocations using violence, and are trying to, or increasingly trying to, influence the events in the country. We have also tried to focus the attention of our counterparts on the fact that the agreement of the 22nd of February is not being implemented. For instance, no decommissioning has happened, no buildings that have been illegally captured have been released, or the streets have not been free of the radicals. So our American partners also said that they think that law and order should be installed. They also agree that the constitutional reform, which would secure or overcome the division in society, is in fact very timely and needs to be carried out. As far as practical measures that could be taken are concerned, or could be taken by foreign partners of Ukraine, we don't have a common ground or similar views. We actually diverge on our views, in our views. But of course, dialogue should continue in order to understand to what extent we do understand each other in the overall context of the broad range of issues being discussed in our American-Russian relations. And of course, the talks were useful in that respect. We did discuss Crimea, reinforced our position or reaffirmed our position that we have stated time and time again, that we are going to respect the will of the Crimean people, which they're going to express on the 16th of March in the referendum. And now you can ask the questions. Yes, you will have a chance to ask the question. Do we have just two sides here? No, we have internationals and Russians. So you think internationals are one side and the Russians are the other side? Okay, fine. Please use the mics. Olga Golovana, Interfax. Will Russia agree to set up a contact group with the participation of Russia, the United States, and European states, and also sending an OSCE mission to Ukraine? Well, I have already had a chance to comment this particular topic. The contact group, the way it is being proposed by our Western counterparts, is based on the fact, on the assumption is that the aim of this multilateral process would be to contribute to the direct negotiations or talks or dialogue between Russia and Ukraine. But we think that this is going to be swapping the ideas. This was not the crisis initiated by the Russian Federation. We have warned our European partners that Ukraine cannot be put in front of this false choice that it was put in front in the preparation of the association agreement being signed by the European Union and Ukraine. When President Yanukovych stated his decision to postpone the procedure, to suspend it. You know, the beginning of the process, how it started, what we said at the time, how we warned against condoning provocations and anti-constitutional calls based by paramilitaries. So if the international community are responsible and thinking responsibly about the fate of the Ukrainian people, they have to call, to urge all sides to start, Ukraine to start a constitutional reform, and the Supreme Rada can start this process by inviting all the regions to participate in it and by ensuring their equal place at the negotiating table. In fact, there is our suggestion, our proposal, which we passed on to our Western partners a week ago, and we can familiarize you with our proposal and our vision, our understanding of how this international support could be provided. So the most important thing is that we don't need an international organization or a structure or body that would allow us to consider Ukrainian-Russian relations. We haven't stopped talking after the events in Kyiv when the legal president was suspended or removed from power. We had some difficulties, but our president, Mr. Putin, has entasked our government to carry on working with the partners in the present Ukrainian government, the Minister for Economy, Energy, and other ministries. We have not stopped contacting the Ministry of the Foreign Affairs either. So the whole range of issues that the Ukrainian colleagues want to discuss with us could be discussed with us directly. And linked to this is the fact that the Ukrainian side, the Council of Foreign Ministers of CIS, and Ukraine is the chairman in the CIS at the moment, has suggested that the meeting of this council should be held in Kiev. And we suggested that, according to the procedures of the CIS, we should first organize a meeting of the deputy ministers of foreign affairs and in the headquarters in Minsk. Unfortunately, our Ukrainian colleagues refused to hold this, but we still continue the dialogue with them. The role of the international community should be as follows. It should encourage all the Ukrainians to start a dialogue about the constitutional reform, while understanding, of course, that any inaction and also condoning the movement of Ukraine and the Ukrainian government in the direction they have been moving so far has, in fact, brought forward the decision of the Supreme Soviet of the Crimea to hold a referendum, and of course we are going to respect the results of the referendum.
The Financial Times, are Russian military forces being made ready to enter eastern Ukraine? We've seen a significant build-up of those forces on the borders, and your ministry this morning made clear that it was ready to act to take citizens of eastern Ukraine under Russian protection in light of events in Donetsk last night.
What happened in Donetsk has already been commented upon by the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. And you have the commentary, you have familiarized yourself with it. What happened was outrageous. Armed people, paramilitaries, arrived in Donetsk from other regions and started to sort out, in inverted commas, the peaceful demonstration, those who were demonstrating against the government in Kyiv. The Russian Federation doesn't have any plans to intervene in eastern Ukraine and couldn't have such plans. We are basing our position on the fact that the rights of the Russians, Hungarians, Bulgarians and Ukrainians themselves have to be ensured and protected. What is happening in the Crimea at the moment, and I think there are no serious violations of human rights. This is because additional measures have been put in place, that the special national defense, self-defense units have formed and started ensuring, and of course, in the center of the European country, which is Kyiv, that sort of disorder does not happen in Kyiv, in the Crimea. So I'll give you an example of what we are doing. Just recently, the Ukrainian side, as part of the Open Skies agreement, have asked us to an emergency procedure to be started, and in order to start circulating over the Russian territories where the maneuvers were taking place, and we gave the permission. So some Western countries do recognize the Kosovans' right to self-determination, for example, and yet at the same time they deny the people of the Crimea such a right. So what do your Western counterparts say to that? Of course, we've discussed the right to self-determination. What do they say? They say that each case is a separate case, a special case, and that's what they say. That's their answer. That's their position. But I am confident that if Kosovo is a separate case, then Crimea is also a separate case, a special case. No less special than Kosovo.
Secretary Kerry raised the issue of sanctions. Did the Secretary threaten Russia with sanctions? And what is your view on the prospect of sanctions, maybe even trade sanctions against Russia?
The State Secretary didn't threaten Russia with anything. He, as far as the prospects of sanctions is concerned, the informational field in which we live, we read and we know what Washington has been discussing, what Europe has been discussing, and I can assure you that our partners are well aware that sanctions are counterproductive. It's a counterproductive measure. And if such sanctions or decisions of this kind is taken, it would not contribute to mutual interests of the businesses, the mutual interests of our partnership being developed. I think it's a fact. Specific measures or what? Well, there's no point. Guessing is not the job of politicians. Guesswork is not the job of politicians.
Can you be clear for us, Mr. Lavrov, after Sunday's referendum, do you expect Crimea to become independent or to become part of the Russian Federation? And if so, Western partners have called this unacceptable annexation. As Russian Foreign Minister, aren't you concerned at the deep deterioration between Russia and the West this could lead to for quite a long time?
As for the referendum, which is going to take place on Sunday in the Crimea, our President Putin has already said that we will respect the choice of the Crimean peoples, because there are lots of different ethnic groups living there. And our attitude to the results of the referendum will become clear when the results are clear, when we know about the results. The Crimean parliament has already adopted a declaration where they stated about their independence, and they also expressed their desire for the referendum to confirm that or reaffirm that. And there's no point in speculating any further. We'll have to wait for the results. As for the statements of our Western partners about the unacceptability of this step, I have already commented upon it. We base it on the assumption that the right to self-determination has not been abandoned. It is one of the United Nations' main principles. And there have been lots of cases in recent times of such proclaimed self-determinant countries. What about the Comor Islands, where at the end of last century there was a referendum on independence from France, and one of the islands was against that independence. And for that reason, France insisted on recounting the votes in order not to include all the people who voted overall, but people of each island individually. And on the basis of that, the Mayotte Island was left as part of France, as part of the colonial territory, and later on was included in the French Republic as one of the departments, overseas departments. What was that? Annexation or self-determination? I'm not sure. So the United Nations, the African Union did not recognize that decision by France, and yet the European Union lives with this decision now, or has been living. As for the reaction of our Western partners, it is their decision. The President of the Russian Federation has constant contacts with President Obama, with Angela Merkel, with David Cameron, with François Hollande and other Western leaders, not just Western leaders, other leaders as well, Chinese leaders, Turkish leaders. And I have daily telephone conversations with my colleagues. We do not try to conceal our position. We don't try to avoid difficult questions being asked. But we have to be honest when we discuss these things.
Do you think, Foreign Minister, that the last chance for a definitive political and diplomatic solution to this crisis has now been lost? Because there is an inevitability to the next 3 days. There will be the referendum on Sunday, and then on Monday, EU foreign ministers meet to consider what they're describing as a series of serious measures against Russia. Has the last chance for diplomacy been lost?
I can't give you an answer to this question. We never shy away from diplomatic channels and trying to settle things diplomatically. If our partners don't want this, of course, we can't force them to look for a diplomatic solution. I hope, and in our private conversations, we feel that there is understanding, and I very much hope that they understand that this case is one of those true cases where you cannot look at it in isolation, away from history. There are precedents in international history, and everybody understands, and I'm telling you this very responsibly, everybody understands what Crimea means for Russia, and it means much more, immeasurably more than Comor used to mean to France. Не слышно.
Well, that was the Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov taking a press conference there and questions from journalists in London. Let's get reaction straight away from our World Affairs correspondent Nick Charles, who was listening to that. So for people just joining us, give us an up sum of what was said there.
Well, Chloe, frankly, there was absolutely no sign of any movement as far as the Russians were concerned after these talks. Mr. Lavrov said essentially it had been good to exchange views again with his American counterpart, but as far as practical measures are concerned, he said, frankly, we don't have common ground. In fact, we have a divergence of views on this. There has been a lot of discussion about the low expectations, essentially, of these negotiations. The British Foreign Secretary has talked about it being an extremely difficult task to try and bring the sides together. But the hope had been at least to try to get agreement on avoiding further escalation in this. And in that respect, perhaps rather ominously, Mr. Lavrov said and reaffirmed that as far as the referendum on Crimea is concerned, that Russia, Mr. Putin, the president, had said that he would respect the views of the Crimean peoples, as he put it, as expressed in the referendum. So I think he wouldn't be drawn. Our colleague Bridget Kendall asked him what he thinks was going to happen in the referendum, and he wouldn't be drawn precisely on that. He said, let's wait for the result. But clearly there will be concerns about that. And on the question of sanctions, of course, the West, the European Union, the United States in particular, have said that if there isn't essentially any move to defuse the situation, then sanctions could be triggered as early as Monday or early next week. And on that, Mr. Lavrov again said, as far as he was concerned, he wouldn't be drawn on the specifics of what was being talked about or threatened, but as far as he was concerned, sanctions, he said, would be counterproductive, and you know, essentially there would be consequences for both sides, although Mr. Kerry and others have talked about serious and immediate consequences for Russia. So from what we heard there, frankly, no sign of any real movement at all.
Nick, thank you for bringing us up to date with what was said in that press conference. Still with us is Alia, who is in Simferopol in Crimea. As you listened to that press conference, as you listened to Sergei Lavrov, what did you think?
It was very sad for me to hear all these things, you know. I'm sorry. Now I'm sorry, I just couldn't help.
Don't apologise. I can understand totally how you're feeling right now. Take your time.
Okay. I just want to say that how can we start even talking with the people who are now saying lies to us? Well, now he's I don't know even what to comment. Every sentence that this person is saying is just so painful for me. Telling that some people are now will vote and he's going to wait for the results of the poll. That's very terrifying. I'm just living next to the main road leading to Simferopol, and every 3 hours I see lots of military cars, lots of big buses carrying the people from Russia, from Taman, from the southern part of Russia. They're here to block our army, Ukrainian army. They're here, the civil people are here just to vote. So I think the results are quite obvious. So I don't know what to do in Monday. I don't know, and now I feel a little betrayed of my Ukraine, betrayed with the, I'm sorry, with international organizations. They made an agreement, they signed the agreement, just having the obligation to protect our people, to protect Ukraine. And what is now happening? It turns out that all these agreements doesn't worth the paper they were written on. How can this come in? And it's really very hard to imagine that it is happening in the 21st century, in the middle of Europe. Don't you understand, I mean, the Europeans understand that this war will touch them also, economically, and probably, if Russia understands that no one can stop it, it can move further. Don't you understand this? I can't make all the people start the war with, well, a war is very scarifying thing. It's a horror, I know, but we should consider the results that may happen if this won't be stopped. Sorry.
Ali, we don't have much time left. I just want to, do you feel let down by the international community?
Yes, I know that international community cares that the economy, so they believe that the economical sanctions can be is a good weapon. But Russia does not carry the economy. The people are living under the level of under the comfortable level, so they doesn't think about this. So I think that I just address all the European community, just fight the enemy with the weapon it is afraid of.
Alia, thank you so much for joining us. I appreciate you taking the time, and incredibly emotional Alia there joining us from Crimea. Thanks for your company. I'll speak to you again soon.
Let me say something.